The Dude Cave Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's Saturday and it's time for our book. And I just finished a wonderful conversation in relationship to our book. And I'm not going to tell you who it was. I'm going to upload it when we finish the book. So what's the book? You remember last time we did I've Been Here Before, When Souls of the Holocaust Return. This was more of a personal exploration of it. This is more of an academic. Beyond the Ashes by Rabbi Gershom. And he is a Jewish scholar who has investigated this. He's also a psychic. And that's an interesting combination, or I thought it was unusual until I read the book. So, hope you guys are going to like it. I want to get right into it. It's absolutely freezing cold. Excuse me if I drink a little hot coffee. I don't want to put on my heater because it makes so much noise. It's really distracting with my new NASA quality, what do you call it? Microphone. I don't even have the terminology. With my new microphone, it picks up everything. I notice it picks up when trucks drive up the street. And I live in a quiet residential neighborhood. So I hope you'll all be able to hear. And we're just going to begin. Beyond the Ashes. Now, this was written in 1992. So keep in mind that, as we know, there's been many more studies and polls and surveys, and so some of the statistics may be a little bit out of date, but it doesn't affect the content of the story in any way. And I have, in most cases, glossed over the really deep dive into personal narratives because it's just too much. This is not what's the name of that? Audible, Not going to be reading the entire book to you. But anyway, Beyond the Ashes, reincarnation is part of the Jewish belief system. I didn't know that. Isaac Luria, a 16th century rabbi, is regarded as one of the greatest Jewish mystics of all time. Not only taught reincarnation, but was reputed to be an accurate past life reader. The same has been said of Israel ben Eliezer, known as the Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement in the 18th century. Reincarnation stories from both of these teachers and their disciples abound in written and oral form. He said, something trying to catch on fire over there. I viewed the stories told to me by modern seekers as a continuation of this tradition. He said, I began meeting with reputable psychics who were also picking up this type of information. And at this point, he saw that his work was having an importance outside of the Jewish community. Now, what's he talking about here? And he denies, this is something I should read to you too. He denies that he's a psychic. And yet, he says, every time I've ever talked on this topic at a spirituality conference, one or more counselors have told me that they too have found such cases and have approached him about it. So chapter 1, the strange encounter on a snowy night. And so he had, this is an example of that. On one snowy night, he had a discussion group. Now, he is a rabbi, a teacher, a spiritual leader, a counselor, and also a psychic. He was having this discussion group, and at the end of it, he was approached by a woman who described to him this problem she was having, that she had this incapacitating dread about the Holocaust. And he said that while he was looking at her, she kind of morphed and he saw an old man, his old man face over hers, and the old man was humming a tune. And the rabbi asked her, do you know this song? And he dropped a book. Do you know this song? And he hummed it. And she burst into tears. So let's see here if I can find it. Since I don't bill myself as a psychic, I don't give readings, nor do I go into a trance or channel spirit guides. What does happen in the course of ordinary activities, I sometimes get impressions that seem to be coming from another level of consciousness. Some of these experiences are visual or auditory, while others are more likely to be a sense of inner knowing. When this happens, I'm still completely aware of my surroundings, so much so that people around me don't usually realize that anything psychic is occurring. In a few of the stories I've described these particular intuitive experiences. So this poor woman starts crying hysterically, and he says, this happened in 81, and since then I've talked with literally hundreds of people who believe they died in the Holocaust and have returned. They've come to this conclusion through every possible means: dreams, visions, deja vu, past life readings, intuition, spirit guides, automatic writing, and hypnotherapy. Most are ordinary citizens from all walks of life, and more are coming forward every day. What is this phenomenon? Has the Holocaust become a universal archetype for human suffering? Or are these people really victims who have reincarnated? And that's basically what this book is about. And the beauty of this particular book is that because he is such a scholar and so knowledgeable, he's able to give an historical and a philosophical context for all of this in terms of the Jewish religion, which I find fascinating. I had no idea. So he kept quiet about it. He thought it was too sensitive of a subject, but he dropped hints because he did a lot of counseling in groups. And people began to contact him privately for consultations. So many that he realized that the time had come to do a workshop. So he got lots of resistance from the mainstream Jewish leadership. They really were not into this whole notion. It was just all a little too new agey for them. And he mentioned these cases in a casual conversation at a Jewish retreat. He was there for a completely different thing. It was like a long, maybe a week even, long week. And he just sort of dropped hints and was approached by a woman, and she claimed that she was a convert to Judaism who remembered dying in the Holocaust. And so he decided, let's just do an impromptu discussion. In my day, they would have called it a rap session. Let's just get together as a group, unofficially not on the schedule. Spread it by word of mouth, see if anybody's interested. If there's enough interest, great. And if not, well, maybe it'll just be a dialogue, So 9 people from all over the country, different parts of the country, showed up. And they all had similar stories. He was really shocked. They were baby boomers. They complained of nightmares and flashbacks. They believed they had been Jews in a former life. They had phobias, dreams, visions, trouble finding. He had trouble finding any kind of reinforcement from Jewish publications other than spiritual publications that were willing to support him, to reinforce this research that he was doing, to encourage him. Nobody wanted to talk about the Holocaust. And the reality is, I wasn't really aware of this so much, but really the Holocaust was a bit of a taboo subject until towards the end of the 70s. It took a long time for that trauma to ease just enough that people were even willing and able to talk about it. A lot of people were afraid even into the early 80s that they would offend people if they talked about it, that it was too soon. Edgar Casey's teachings are really based in Christianity, but there was a group of Jews who felt that his teachings had universal applications beyond religious differences. And the central idea in his readings was that people had lived on earth many times before, and past lives affect us physically and spiritually. And knowledge of a past life can be used to heal physical ailments and psychological problems, phobias, etc., etc. And that is reincarnation. So the rabbi finally got printed in a book called periodical called Venture Inward. He wrote an article in the November-December issue of 1987 called "Are Holocaust Victims Returning?" He got an enormous response. He was completely overwhelmed. It was global. All over the world, people wrote to him. He was completely overwhelmed. People called him, haunted by these memories, and told him, they wanted to be anonymous, most of them, and they told him just being able to talk about this with you here on the phone today is therapeutic. This is what I needed. Many had trouble even talking about it. They'd call him 2 or 3 times before they were able to stop hanging up and just anonymously share their story. So his observation is either this is true or there's a huge network of global liars perpetrating an enormous hoax. And he often felt the calls for healing on both sides. So he often spoke of rituals, terminology, and events that were meaningless to them, these people. They would call and they would use Yiddish phrases. They would speak about Jewish holidays and obscure Jewish personal ritual that where would they get that in most cases? But the rabbi recognized all this stuff immediately. For example, a Lutheran woman called him and told her story, and she said, I don't understand this, but I've had this obsession since I was a child. Every Friday night I have to light candles. Well, even I know that's a Jewish tradition. But he also spoke with parents who were pulling their hair out because their kid would not eat unless they separated the meat and the milk, which is kosher. He was in an Omni magazine. He did an article in September of '88. And one of the things he talked about that today there are a large number of blue-eyed, blonde non-Jews who seem to remember being terrified Jewish children or adults who had wished at the moment of their trauma that they had never been born Jewish. Many traditional Jews were insulted to hear that their ancestors had reincarnated as non-Jews. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't laugh, but it kind of amuses me because, to put that much importance, on people are people. But they took this very seriously, and to think that a Jewish soul would enter a non-Jewish body just really horrified people who were very traditional. Many believed in the 16th century teachings of a guy called Isaac Luna that Jews remain Jews throughout. Their souls are Jewish. That's a kind of soul, and it just will always reincarnate Jewish. So the rabbi, his wife got sick, and interestingly, she developed that sensitivity to chemicals, and they had to move out of the city because the smog and the exhaust and stuff were making her sick. And they moved to a rural area for her benefit, but there were no Jews there, and overnight they lost their community. And he observes that Judaism is not just a religion, it's a Yiddishkeit. I hope I said that right. It's all one word, Yiddishkeit. Jewishness. It's an entire way of life. It's like a tribal culture. And I think I might have even just said that last week, not realizing there's a term for it. So they miss their community. They miss the getting together for rituals and food and songs. And in their new area, he said, not only was there not a Jewish community, but there was no interfaith interaction. And he wasn't used to that. He was used to living in an urban area with a lot of, progressive religious communities that reached across the aisle to other religions and worked ecumenically. And he said all he got in this new area was proselytizing and no interfaith dialogue. And in fact, people thought anything esoteric was satanic. Marjorie Taylor Greene. So he discussed reincarnation on a local TV show. He was invited to come and interviewed. And as a result, he was banned from volunteering at the nearby prison. He was doing outreach for the prisoners, which is a mitzvah in the Jewish religion. Counsel or give solace to the prisoner. It's something you're supposed to do, along with feeding the hungry, helping the poor, visiting the sick. Be kind to the prisoners. And his discussion of reincarnation on this little local TV program freaked people out so badly the prison wouldn't let them volunteer there anymore because they had fundamentalist prejudices. And it took a long time. He said the administration of the prison had to change before he was welcomed back. He said life became difficult. His wife's illness was worse. They were in isolation. It was cultural shock. He said he was too overeducated for the area. There were no jobs that actually met his ability, and he was unemployable in a rural area. So he began to do secular writing, and at the same time, he was still receiving stories from people about this Holocaust reincarnation. So he began to question why he was carrying this burden of hearing these terrible dreams, these nightmares of death and torture and misery and starvation. And then he had a dream. And in his dream, I'm gonna read you this. It was easier just to read it. One night I dreamed that I was a young Hasidic boy, 8 or 9 years old, living in Eastern Europe. The Jews of the village had gathered together and we could hear the sounds of battle in the distance. My father was the village rabbi, trying to comfort the people. He explained that although they were about to die, they should not be afraid because the body is only a garment. The soul, he said, lives forever and will one day return to earth in a new garment. But the rabbi explained sadly that there was a problem. For many, many incarnations, their souls had returned to this same village to be born as their children's children. This time, however, the village would be destroyed completely and none would survive to provide new bodies for the souls. They could never again come back to this place and might therefore become separated from one another in the next life. How would they ever find each other again? It was decided to draw straws. The person thus chosen would incarnate immediately and look for a new place for the villagers to return. After preparing the way, he would serve as a psychic beacon for the other souls who would seek him out. In this way, it was hoped the villagers would not become lost to one another. Solemnly, the Jews said a prayer together, then each took a straw while the sounds of battle drew closer and closer. Suddenly, everyone gasped. I had drawn the short straw. Just as I was about to protest that I was too young and didn't know how, the Nazis entered the village and began shooting everyone. I woke up. So let me see. Okay. I felt that I lived before. On other occasions, I felt that I'd lived before in Eastern Europe during a time before the Holocaust when Hasidism was still mystical and had not yet succumbed to politics. Over the years, a number of people have confided that they believe me to have been their rabbi in another life. I am willing to accept the possibility, but I'm also inclined to believe that this particular dream is meant to be more symbolic. Like the boy in the dream, I have been entrusted with a responsibility that is not entirely of my own choosing. Whatever the reason, once I opened the door, the way was cleared for other wounded souls to find one another and to begin to heal. This book is the story of that healing. Chapter 2, Flashbacks to Another Life. Before the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and I think a lot of people today may not know this, there were many restrictions on people of color, but equally on the Jews. They were denied housing. And it was perfectly legal. Oh, you're Jewish. You have a name that ends in Stein. You're Jewish. We're going to make that assumption. Bloomberg. Yeah, you don't get the job. And in admission to university, it was also restricted. They had quotas for how many Jews they would take. There's the example of Beverly, who was a single mother that he met in his social work. She was illiterate. And he met her through social services. They had discovered that her family hid from her the fact that she was part Jewish. And she came to him wanting to learn more about her background. She shared a recurring childhood nightmare with him. In the dream, she was a little boy about 7 or 8 standing in line with his mother. Beverly described how they got to a table where a man was telling some people to go to the left and others to the right. He pointed and they went through a door. The scene shifted and they were suddenly in a horrible place where there was a terrible smell. Some men were throwing people into a fire. Oh, this may be traumatic to listen to. I'm sorry. This entire book has difficult stories. Some men were throwing people into a fire alive, and then the little boy was thrown in too. He kept patting himself, trying to put out the flames, but then he died. At this point in Beverly's narrative, I suddenly, this is the rabbi, suddenly began to smell burning flesh. Excusing myself from the table, I went to the kitchen, even though we're vegetarians, and it was not logical to be looking for meat in our oven. Still, it was the natural place to check for something burning. Everything was fine in the kitchen, but I could still smell smoke, so I looked outside. None of my neighbors was barbecuing, and the smell was not as strong. It was stronger in the house. Is something wrong? My wife asked. I smell smoke, I said. Don't you? Both Beverly and his wife looked at him and said no, they didn't smell anything at all. A chill went up my spine as I suddenly realized I was having what's called an olfactory psychic experience. As Beverly was telling her story, I apparently tuned into her soul memory. As soon as I realized this, the smell went away. The scene shifted with the little boy and his mother. This is the dream of Beverly again, finding themselves standing once again in a long line of people. Up ahead were the most beautiful gates, and the little boy knew it was heaven. Strangely, the men in line were wearing hats, and Beverly remembered thinking it was odd that they didn't take off their hats to go into heaven. Then the little boy grew tired of waiting and wandered off down to a lower level where he met a male angel. The angel said, "Now that you have come down this far, you'll have to go back to earth again." He didn't want to go and kept asking for his mother, but the angel said they would have to find him another mother. The boy was then shown a beam of light that he followed into a woman, and he became Beverly. So it's important to mention, he says, that not all Jews were gassed, and a lot of people don't realize that. Of course, there were the Einsatzgruppen, German, that were the itinerant groups of execution squads that rounded people up and took them into the into quarries, into the forest, and shot them and killed them. But there were also trucks that drove around. When they first started, this was experimental. It was their first effort at gassing people. They would put them into the back of a truck and drive around until the carbon monoxide killed them. So he says there was a wide variety of the way the Jews died. Shooting, vans of carbon monoxide, pits. They were thrown into burning pits. They were burned in churches. They were drowned, hanged, buried alive, medical experiments. But Beverly knew that in her dream, or apparently she knew that children were often burned alive. They didn't want to waste the gas. They would throw them into the ovens. And she also knew that men kept their hats on. A lot of people think that when Jews pray, they put on the little yarmulke. But Orthodox Jews wear a tall hat, and especially in those days. And they would definitely wear that to go to meet their maker. And she also knew, she did a weird thing that nobody could understand. When she ate bread, she always salted the bread. Kosher habit. She would, as a child, would pretend that she had tefillin wrapped around her arms. Those are those sort of ribbons with boxes on them that Orthodox men wear when they daven, they pray. So then there's Joan, who had panic attacks whenever she lived on a farm, and every time she saw barbed wire on this farm, she would have a panic attack. That can be problematic. She spent the first 3 years of my life in absolute terror. I had the same nightmare night after night of being burned alive with Nazis throwing dirt on me. In my childhood, there was no color TV, just radio and black and white newsreels. I would go to pieces every time I saw a newsreel, and I knew what color the German uniforms were, even though they were in black and white. I did not have this terror about the Japanese, just the Germans. I knew about concentration camps before I could understand the English word for it. She was born in 1939, and at 18 months of old, she almost died of respiratory things. She was Bavarian, gypsy, their phrase, blood, on her grandmother's side, and believed she may have been a gypsy, a Romany, when she suffered death at the hands of the Nazis. She found herself as a 5-year-old girl being buried alive by Nazis in the early winter of 39. I remember the terror, the death, the confusion, the why me, and it has carried over into this lifetime. The childhood memories were always the same over and over. It was so cold and dark, a forest, tall trees, a mass grave, Germans. I especially remember their black boots. There was snow. I still see blood, but not me bleeding. I was buried alive and suffocated. The dirt was so heavy. And then the Nazis often didn't bother to even shoot the children. They didn't want to waste the ammunition. They just threw them into the pits and then threw other people on top of them. Lovely. So, how to prove that these cases are true? There's no real way. So that's the end of the book. No, I'm kidding. We don't have proof. It frequently happens that mystical truths can later be investigated scientifically with the invention of better technology. And then he talks a lot about the study of brain waves and meditation. And everybody in the Western scientific world laughed at the Swami Rama from the Himalayas, who said that he could alter his brain waves at will and control his bodily functions that are normally handled by the autonomic nervous system. Finally, when they had the ability, they hooked him up to laboratory technology and went, whoops, he's right. So perhaps some of these details can be verified, and all of the people that have this sort of, let's call it a Holocaust syndrome, makes it easier, have some combination of these signs or symptoms. Childhood nightmares or phobias about the Holocaust. They have, he asks, have the Nazis become the archetypical boogeyman? Is this just sort of a psychological evolution because of historical events? But how would a 3-year-old Christian kid in the Midwest know anything about it to begin with? Another sign is a non-Jewish person with Jewish behaviors or Jewish compulsions or Jewish habits. Or Jews from non-religious backgrounds who have an innate grasp of really esoteric Jewish mysticism. That sometimes happens. These people may feel very out of place in their family, like they're born into the wrong family or adopted, mixed up at birth, that kind of thing. Edgar Cayce said kids who died in World War II were reincarnated too fast into incompatible families. This is from Edgar Cayce. That it's better to die at an old age because then you have a longer waiting period between lives. But oftentimes souls that reincarnate quickly have had some sort of traumatic death and at a young age. Birth the other symptom that they have is they were born during the baby boom era, or born during the baby boom era and almost dying in the process of birth. So between roughly 46 and the 1950s. And so, excuse me, I'm cold. So did they come, espresso, did they come to work for peace and the civil rights movement? Is this one of the reasons that these souls all seem to have incarnated at the same time? Often these people have difficulty feeling grounded in this life. They feel like they came back too soon and they don't want to be here. Many of them, and this is interesting, many of them had asthma or bronchitis or breathing problems or anorexia and eating disorders, and it seems to be related to gassing or suffocation and starvation. Sort of a vestige of revisiting their former death. And a huge percentage of them, not all of them, but a huge percentage of them have light-colored hair and light-colored eyes. And most of them have extremely emotional reactions to the whole topic of the Holocaust. Much more exaggerated than the ordinary person on the street. Chapter 3, the Afterlife in Jewish Teaching. Jewish teaching has no one definitive doctrine on life after death. They don't, like Christians, heaven or hell. Jews don't go for that. They don't believe in that. They believe they're pretty rational religion. There's no scientific proof of an afterlife, and therefore it's really ridiculous in their mind to be dogmatic about it. They kind of take a wait-and-see attitude. We'll figure it out when we get there. But they've developed a variety of different ideas, depending on culture, time period, influence around them. Some Jews believe that you do survive, but you survive genetically through your descendants, which makes it really important to have children. Very important. And especially male children. Sorry, that's just cultural. Some Some of them believe in a physical resurrection, as in Christianity. Some of them believe you just have an immortal soul and it exists in this perfect afterlife, call it heaven, whatever you want to call it. And then some believe in reincarnation, and some believe they're not mutually exclusive, combination of all these things or some of these things. So what are the teachings? Where do they come from? Well, one of the major sources of Jewish knowledge is the Talmud, which comes from the word to study. And it's a multi-volume set of works begun in 200 BC and all the way into about the 500s. And it was originally from an oral tradition, so it's much older than 200 BC, but they finally started writing it down then. It's divided into 64 sections called Tractates, which have themes. It's really interesting. Instead of a linear kind of chronology of knowledge, they do a theme and then you do a deep dive. And there are laws and also non-legal topics. Some Jews believe that all of this knowledge in the Talmud is mandatory, these laws, and some not so much. Some are followers of a collection of writings called the Midrash, and that comes from the word to search. And this is a soul searching through a combination of literature, like lore, poems, lyrics, parables, allegories. For example, the Zohar, which comes from the Kabbalah, hope I said that right, which is a running commentary on the first 5 books of the Bible. So these sources all assume that the student is conversant with them and will understand the nuance in them. And much of the Hebrew language in these Midrash, this collection of writings, much of the Hebrew is symbolic. So a word is fraught with layers of meaning. This combination of the Bible, I forgot to mention the Bible, the Old Testament, the Talmud, and Midrash, all put together is called the Torah. And all of that together means teachings. And it includes all the Jewish writings of the past roughly 5,000 years. And anything new that comes up does not negate the old. They don't, oh, we have a new discovery, throw that out. No, they don't do that. They build on it. And they evolve their theology, I guess, or philosophical beliefs. So what did Jews think about the afterlife? Some believe in survival through your descendants, that your soul doesn't survive, but you survive through your seed. And therefore, that explains the obsession with genealogy in the Bible. That's one of the reasons. And also why many Orthodox Jewish people believe that childlessness is a tragedy. And it's kind of a stereotype, the Jewish mother who has to have the children and gets really upset when you get married and you're a young couple and you don't have a baby and make her a grandmother. There's an historical, cultural, religious context for that. It's easy to write people off for being neurotic or a living stereotype, and that's not fair. That urge comes from many, many, many millennia of culture that tells you you must have children to continue your line. And without kids, they believe, a family ends spiritually. So they consider celibacy irresponsible, that celibacy is a form of spiritual suicide. So if you're a teenager and you've got a boyfriend or girlfriend and you need to explain something to your parents, tell them that you've been studying Jewish philosophy and you don't want to commit spiritual suicide. Sorry. So, some believe that the spark of life, which is not really the soul, but kind of like the soul, is passed on from person to person in a family. And the spark of life needs to not be destroyed. It needs to continue in the gene pool. Interestingly enough, research is now indicating that DNA contains light. So there you go. So the Talmudic teaching, quote, whoever destroys a single person destroys an entire world, and whoever saves a single person saves an entire world, is traditionally explained with this notion of the spark of life in every soul, and it's the spark of the soul of Adam. So there's that survival thing. Then there's the idea of physical resurrection. It was important for a while, and it had much influence on the development of Christianity, and then it kind of went its merry way, but the Christians glommed onto it. So the question that he asks, that historians have wondered about, is did this notion of the survival of the physical resurrection of the body, did that come from the Egyptians through Moses? Because, Moses was enslaved by the Egyptians, became the visionary for the Pharaoh, and trusted advisor for the Pharaoh, and even though he was Jewish, and was heavily influenced by Egyptian belief systems. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the name Moses probably came from the Egyptian. That Moses is sounds like, Tutmosis. It sounds like an Egyptian name, and I could be wrong, but I'm just thinking. Early Jews believed that you had to have your bones for immortality. You had to at least preserve the bones so that you would be born again later, be immortal, and that the body could reconstitute from the bones in order to have physical resurrection. So every Jew gets a little bit of the Holy Land dirt to symbolize their return to resurrection when they're buried. They throw a little bit in there. And they bury them with their feet pointed towards the Holy Land. The idea is that if you burn a body, buried. That if you bury a body with its feet towards the Holy Land, even if it's on the other side of the planet, there are tunnels, and the feet will carry them through there to the Holy Land. And they sort of posit, okay, this sounds very much like going to the tunnel, to the light at the end of it, and is this really a description, an ancient description of near-death experience that has lost its context, but we still keep the ritual of burying them that way. Modern Jews mostly don't go for resurrection of the body. They're not into that. So the third concept, an immortal soul that goes to heaven. The Bible doesn't really talk, the Old Testament doesn't really spell out anything about the soul. Later Jewish writings do. And the Rabbi says that doesn't mean that the notion of a soul didn't exist. It was just such a strong part, an important, integral part of the oral tradition. It was like unnecessary to write it down. In ancient times, esoteric writings kept secret because you could be punished, if you were practicing these Jewish ideas. And their books were handwritten when they did finally write books. So there weren't many copies. There weren't many opportunities to pass knowledge on. So there was a strong oral tradition. And it was very common for most education in most cultures pre-invention of the printing press that they were all oral traditions. Many of these things were memorized. Memory work was a point of pride. For example, troubadours could memorize several hundred lines of poetry after hearing them just 3 times, which is incredible. I can't even remember what day it is when I'm told every hour on the hour. And at the time, academics would brag about being able to memorize 100 lines after hearing them only once. It's incredible. In the Jewish tradition, a true Talmudic scholar could take a sheaf, a pile of papers, put a pin directly through all of them, and tell you exactly what letter it went through. Granted that it would have to be written with the Talmud, and they're written all the same. And they knew it so well, they could say, well, on this page, at that spot, was the letter E. It's hard to believe. True, but incredible to believe. But in the Middle Ages, your average everyday Jewish person did believe in a soul. In the 12th century, there was a philosopher called Maimonides, and he believed that there would eventually come a time when there would be no death and no body, and he called this the world to come. And he believed that souls without a body were kind of like angels. A common Jewish metaphor for heaven is the Garden of Eden, where everything is in perfect harmony. Or they also refer to it as a heavenly academy, a place of Torah learning, where you study, feast, sing around an eternal Sabbath table. And he mentions many times the Sabbath is not like a Christian Sunday, where you go to church and you're hideously bored and you get yelled at if you fidget, and you listen to people droning on endlessly. And then if you're a Catholic, you're up and down, you get your aerobic exercise for the week. And he said, no, the Jewish Sabbath is a communal sharing of a meal, songs, and community. That it's a re-cementing of community and culture, and it's supposed to be joyous. First, the soul has to be judged, though, by the heavenly tribunal when you go to heaven. And this is very much like the existing in the real world today, a thing called the Bet Din, B-E-T-D-I-N, which is a rabbinical court of 3 scholars who judge Jewish law for people. It's also somewhat like the Bardo, which is the Tibetan Buddhist place where your soul hangs out between lives. And also there you face a board of judgment of 3 judges. And they believe that your good deeds are recorded in the book of life, and they are brownie points, merits in the world to come. So it's important to fulfill mitzvah, good deeds. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick. And while you have a physical body, it's important to do these because doing them accumulates merits. And this very much sounds parallel to me of doing plenary indulgences, grace, the whole notion in Christianity and early Catholicism especially, that, good deeds get you brownie points. I mean, I know I'm kind of minimizing it, but I'm trying to make it really simple for anyone who hasn't belonged to any of these particular religions. They all seem to have a process in place by which you do good things and you get credit for doing those good things. We're talking karma. And it's easier in the Jewish religion to incur that merit in a higher level for the world to come if you're doing it in a physical body. So it's saying it has good karma. And for bad karma, for bad deeds, sins, they call that Gehenna. You go to a place called Gehenna, which is a bit like purgatory, where your soul is purified. You're purified of your sins. In fact, the word purgatory comes from the sense of purge of your sins. They don't believe in an eternal hell because they believe even the most evil person has done some good in the world someplace. I mean, even Hitler was a baby. Bad people experience the pain and suffering in this process. They, after death, they experience the pain and suffering that they cause others. This is like the life review, right? Some believe there are levels, that only God is absolutely perfect and every soul is on its way to enlightenment, but what you encounter after death kind of depends on where your soul is. If you're a soul and you have no body, you can't do the mitzvahs, you can't do the good deeds, but interesting little process in place. Once somebody dies, their surviving friends and relatives can do mitzvahs on their behalf. And the dead person can get credit by the works of the still living if they put it out there that it's in their name. And that's why it's a very common Jewish tradition to dedicate a charity in the name of a dead loved one. It's why a lot of wealthy Jewish people will endow wings of hospitals or research labs or universities or whatever the charity, because this is a religious thing. They believe that if you dedicate, your grandmother dies and you have a lot of money, you can dedicate the cancer wing of the hospital, give it the money in her name. They'll put her name over the doorway, and this benefits her in the afterlife. It's kind of cool. You can do this also. You can say, this good deed that I'm about to do, or this lesson that I'm learning, is for my dead uncle who I really didn't like, so I think he needs my help. And they say Kaddish, which is a prayer for the dead. It's begun after somebody dies. It's said steadily for 11 months in the morning and at night after death for 11 months. And it's exactly, it reminded me, his description of how you did that reminded me very much of these little prayers that we used to do, that we offered up for the souls in purgatory. It's the same thing. Traditionally, the Jews did not celebrate birthdays. They celebrated Yarzeit, which is the day of remembrance, or the anniversary of your death. And that was considered your birth into the next world, your connection, your reincarnation. And they believe that there's a connection between the two worlds and a very thin veil between them. So interaction with souls is not a scary thing. It's almost expected. And finally, of course, the afterlife can be reincarnation, and it's referred to obliquely in some biblical passages and in the Kabbalah. It became explicit in the 14th century in Zohar, the Kabbalah writing. It was referred to as Gilgul. Then there's Ibur, which is a soul entering a live person, kind of like possession, only it's for good things. It's to help that person. Gilgul is rebirth into a brand new baby, new body, and Ibur is hopping on for a while to help somebody out. Kabbalah is the definition, the translation of it is that which has been received. And this is the mysticism of the Jewish religion. And it's equivalent to the spiritual process of receiving inner wisdom. And it was kept secret, esoteric, or proper use of the word occult. It was occulted for a very long time. They believed it was dangerous to teach it to the masses because it might lead the ignorant to heresy. Students of the Kabbalah often took an oath of secrecy before they were allowed to learn anything, and it was not openly studied until the printing press was invented. It became more accessible in the 18th century. The Hasidim, who are the very Orthodox Jews, they believe in reincarnation. They are resistant to change and have always been resistant to change. And they're not embracing a new idea. They were hanging on to the old idea that everybody else sort of forgot about. So they're hanging on to an ancient tradition and just continuing it. Reform or conservative Jews are much more skeptical, depends on who you talk to. Many today actually toy with comparative philosophy, and that word toy is wrong because that sort of implies that it's capricious, and that's not it at all. They explore comparative philosophies and other religions and embrace the notion of reincarnation, but it's not new to the Jewish religion. It's an ancient tradition. Chapter 4, Jewish souls in Gentile bodies. It's very common knowledge that the Jews have historically been singled out and suffered by the mere fact of being Jews. And he tells the story of a Christian woman in Chicago who dreamed of being a child thrown into an oven, and in her death throes, thinking to herself, I will never be a Jew. I won't be a Jew. Yelling at the murderers, okay, I won't be a Jew, but too late, she died. And with those words on her lips, she had reincarnated not a Jew. The Jews believe that one's focus at the time of death is very important. They have a very special prayer that you're supposed to say when you're dying, called the Shema, S-H-E-M-A. And, if you die suddenly, you don't have the opportunity. Many Jews were assimilated before the Holocaust and really weren't practicing their religion, and especially kids who didn't know why they were Jews. They didn't understand what was bad about it, why it singled them out for bullying in school and then, torture. They rejected the notion. And therefore, when they achieved this traumatic death and their soul was hanging out there, decided, I got to reincarnate quickly, because that happens often for small children who die traumatically. But the one thing that soul remembered was, I'm not going to be Jewish. He noticed an extremely high percentage of people with this reincarnation from the Holocaust belief who were blue-eyed blondes, and he says that it's a psychological thing often that oppressed people will identify with their oppressors, and he wonders if this is factoring into it. So he talks about 20 cases that are suggestive of reincarnation, which is a book by our friend Dr. Ian Stevenson, who just comes up over and over again, from the University of Virginia, who discusses the birthmarks and scars and deformities that can correspond to previous life memories. Then there's the University of Oregon psychologist Ray Hyman, who says that these are internalized guilt, that it's not reincarnation, that blonde people will fantasize that they're reincarnated from the Holocaust because so many Nazis were blonde, and they feel guilty. These people today feel guilty that they look like the oppressors, and they internalize this self-loathing and I must be Jewish. I don't know if I agree with that. Anyway, he notes that not all respondents, the Rabbi says that not all of the people who responded to him were blonde. They came from every racial profile. There were plenty of black people from India, so, it doesn't hold. And the example he gives is Regina, a black woman who from early childhood felt she didn't fit into her family. She had nightmares of the SS invading her house. She remembered hiding in the woods behind a brick wall and not understanding why. She had the psychic impression of a child's composition book with the name Friedrich and Austerlitz written on it in Czechoslovakian. And she sought out hypnotherapy and did some past life regressions and discovered that she had been a Jewish boy named Friedrich who lived in Bergestrasse, Austerlitz in the 1930s. And under hypnosis, she wrote left-handed, which is Hebrew. But in her present incarnation, she was a right-handed person and wrote, did everything right-handed. She regressed to the day that she so she regressed to her past life, and in that regression, her father at the time came home from work and said they've given Czechoslovakia to Hitler, and in the regression, they realized it was September 30th, 1938, the day that was done. As this boy Friedrich, she ran for his rifle when the SS came to gather them up, and the Nazis took it out of his hand and shot his parents in front of him. His sister was raped in front of him and hanged, and he was killed at the age of 15. She described, they took him to the camp and he was gassed. And she described Frederick's corpse as being green, and it's later understood that the gas did that to people. After dying, Frederick saw lights and heard his sister's voice, his dead sister's voice, and she appeared as a body of light. And Regina remembered this. Regina, the black woman, is remembering this as a young Austrian boy. Then there's Irene from Minneapolis, who one day, out of the blue, driving by the train tracks, had this horrible flashback of people being herded onto trains and separated from each other. And she's flashbacks, if you remember, we've done those before, are very much like you're reliving it. It's not imaginary. You feel like you are actually living it. It's not just a panic attack. And she saw an old man who said to her, Yosef, don't forget. And then she was in a shower room with a crowd of people, and then death. And she didn't understand why being in a shower room would lead to death. She didn't know about the gas. She always felt that her wedding ring should be on her right hand. This is a Jewish tradition. Hasidic Jews believe that religious and ethnic identity can be carried over into the next life. They don't have any problem with that sense of reincarnation. But they do believe that Jewish and Gentile souls are different. Once a Jew, always a Jew. The nature of souls is debated. Is this heritage versus the roots of a soul? Which is it? And this comes with different spiritual responsibilities. Why would they believe these are different? Souls are different. Neither good nor bad. This is not about one better than the other. This is about different spiritual responsibilities. They believe the Torah transcends space and time, and it comes from the mind of God. The rabbi does believe that a soul that binds itself to a covenant can be bound to that covenant over a number of different incarnations, and so there may be this attraction. More advanced souls do make plans for a number of lives ahead. Souls of the righteous study the Torah with sages in the world to come, the Bardo, and they seek out a life of mitzvah. They seek out a life of doing good for people. Jews believe that consciousness of the parents at the time of conception will determine the nature of the soul that incarnates. And therefore, the best time to conceive is on the Sabbath. So, unlike the Puritans, who were grim and, would never have approved of, on a Sunday, the Jewish Sabbath, which Friday night at sunset until, I guess, Saturday at sunset, they thought that was the time to get it on because you wanted a child to be conceived in the happiness of the Sabbath. And you wanted purity of thought. It was really important in conception. Many Jews with Holocaust flashbacks didn't know that Jews believed in reincarnation, he discovered. The Holocaust really wasn't known about widely until the 70s. There were a few PhD students in the 1950s who wanted to do their dissertations on the Holocaust, and they were told, no, don't do that, no one's interested. So there's a strong emotional denial. Even Elie Wiesel, the writer who survived the camps, was so traumatized from his survival at the Holocaust that it took him 10 years to start writing about it. And in the 50s, nobody wanted to talk about it at all. And also, there was very little interaction between Jews and Gentiles. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. Some subjects who came to the rabbi had known nothing about Jews, had never met a Jew. And they actually thought Jews celebrated Easter and Christmas. Souls killed in the Holocaust may have thought that they wanted to be born into the safer, dominant culture, but these Jewish memories came back to haunt them. They felt cut off from their people. And he says that there's this belief in group karma that connects souls. Remember that. We're going to talk about that later. Coming back as not a Jew may have an important karmic lesson for you. So it may be intentional. Some soul groups go from belief to belief and serve as a bridge to others. They help break the barriers between people. You can slow a soul's evolution, learning bits and pieces and never going any deeper. So it's a real volunteer thing for a group of souls to, be Christian one lifetime, Jewish another lifetime, because they're doing a little bit, rather than doing a deep dive and embracing an enormous philosophy. But that is... the counter effect of that is that it's a mitzvah that they volunteered to do this to help other people to unite so that other religions are not at each other's throats. Souls who stay in one belief system serve as the pillars and help the others who make the bridge. They help master knowledge that requires more than one incarnation. And an example of that kind of a soul would be the Dalai Lama. Perhaps interincarnation is to help end prejudice. He says that Jewish religion discourages conversion because being Jewish isn't easy. They don't have the same prejudices against teachings of other religions as other religions have about each other and about Judaism. But non-Jews serve God, and Jews who obey the 7 laws of Noah, non-Jews obey the 7 laws of Noah to be saved, don't need to become Jews. And those 7 laws are: don't practice idolatry, no profanity in the name of God, no murder, don't eat the flesh cut from a live animal, don't steal, don't practice incest or adultery, and take something into your own hands. And I can't read what I wrote. Don't take like revenge into your own hands. So because they believe that it's so hard to be Jewish, they tell people just practice these laws of Noah and you'll be good to go. Those are the bottom line of what the Creator asks of all people. So I'm going to stop here. This is the end of chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 5. So this will be the end of video 1. I hope you guys are liking this. I find this absolutely fascinating. In high school, we took a year of comparative religions and we studied Judaism pretty intensively. I don't remember any of this. All I remember is they have a holiday, Purim, which is a little bit like Halloween. That's all I remember. When you're 15 or 16, you just don't go deep, Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to upload this and then I'll be back. So, Slán go foil.